Welcome to the Pit Wall Panic podcast. This week we have a lot of stuff to get into based off of the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. First, if you're not already subscribed to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you ain't following us on uh, Twitch, TikTok, Twitter, go ahead and go on over to these platforms and give us a follow. Um, I'm gonna also start trying to upload more stuff to Instagram for those that are over there. If you're in the Discord server, you'll see that I have done a ton of remodeling to the server. We added a lot more info to it. The Info Hub channel now has our schedule linked directly in it. We have a whole bunch of stuff in there now, so go check it out. Join the party, join the fun. With that being said, let's get into this week's fun time that was China. Um, a lot of unexpected stuff I feel like happened this weekend in the regards of just something that we'll be getting and talking into later is if you go look at the standings right now, Haas is fourth in the standings as a constructor and only I think 2 points behind McLaren. And when we talk about it later, I'll double check that number. Who would have ever guessed that Haas could be fighting for third in the constructor standings? That's just insane to me. But like I said, we'll get into that further later on. It's just so many shenanigans are going on this weekend. We saw Ferrari bring the Macarena wing to China. They used it in FP1, didn't use it in sprint qualifying, didn't use it in the sprint race, did not use it in qualifying or the Grand Prix race. So, what are they doing? Well, Fred Vasseur was asked that same exact question. And what it comes down to is they feel like it's not reliable enough yet, that there's still some issues with it. So they are deciding to abstain from using it at the moment and running it in FP1 until they are comfortable with it. They said, or Fred said, that we will see it in Japan. We'll see it in FP1. But we don't know yet when it'll be on the car. It could be that it goes on directly after Japan and stays on if they have it figured out. It could be that we have to wait another week. He said that we're either going to see the swing put down in Japan, which is unlikely, or that they're going to figure out what's going on and keep working on it, and then we'll just see it in FP1 each week until they're comfortable with running it. But we don't really know yet on what's happening until they throw it on, I guess. So now the question becomes is what do we expect out of this wing? Who knows exactly? It's supposedly going to give them 8 to 10 kilometers an hour faster time. But again, that's just what we saw at a preseason testing. There's no hard data yet. So it'll be nice to see once that actually goes in. Who knows? So then we can kind of go forward, go to looking at qualifying, sprint quali. We'll go there. Mercedes dominated sprint qualifying again. And then after qualifying, Lewis come out. I can't remember if it was after sprint qualifying or if it was after the Grand Prix qualifying, but he come out and said, I spent a ton of time at Mercedes and they have an extra mode in their engine that they use after Q2. That's why after Q2, all of a sudden, they just pick up all this pace. So they do have a quali car. And that is very interesting to me that they have gone to that degree. What does that mean for Ferrari throughout qualifying? I think that means that I think that means that qualifying is going to be hard regardless throughout the rest of the season, just because they have looked so dominant and so good in that car for qualifying. It's just the closest qualifying difference that we've seen is that they were zero point 0.3 off the pace. I think is what it was. It was only 0.3, 0.5. I think is what it was. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. It could be that once the engine regs change, not regs, but the way they are testing things change, it brings Mercedes back some. But right now, they're just a monster in qualifying. I thought it was just the open air was helping them be better because in dirty air, like, again, we'll get closer to this. George really struggled in the dirty air, it feels like, in the Grand Prix. So I thought it was maybe just dirty air was holding them up. But it's, I mean, if what Lewis is saying is true, they have a car that's just abnormally good in qualifying, and there's nothing you can really do about that. Nothing says that they can't have another mode that I'm aware of for qualifying. So that's very interesting. When we look at the sprint race, though, it ended with a 0.6 second gap instead of this huge 10-second gap that we saw in Australia. It was a lot closer, and I think Mercedes and Ferrari are going to continue to have this battle all season. It'll be very interesting to see what happens when the engine change or the engine regulations changes happens. Supposedly, as of right now, rumor has it that Ferrari is working on doing some upgrades to bring for the engine specifically to bring them closer to Mercedes. And if that's the case, that's probably pretty terrifying if you're a Mercedes fan, because we don't know what that engine is going to look like whenever they have to follow the strict 16:1 ratio. We know right now that as the car heats up, it goes to an 18:1 compression ratio. If Ferrari can neutralize that and stay within regulation, when the regulation is strictly enforced and they're testing ambient and the hot temperatures, what does that do to Mercedes? Only time will tell. But, you know, it's a question you got to wonder and a question you got to think about. So then we go through qualifying. It wasn't anything super fancy. Wasn't anything special. We had let me pull the exact data real quick. I have it right here. I just have to. Okay, so we had a George Russell, Charles Leclerc, and Lewis Hamilton finish in the sprint race, which shows that they have the potential to sit here and really go back and forth with Mercedes this season, I feel like, and could potentially give them a bigger fight for the Constructors' Championship. It's not just going to be a runaway job, I don't think. Again, time will tell. And they're already fighting hard, so anything is possible. I'm looking at my notes here. I think it's interesting that we saw, you know, usually in a sprint, you're not really going to see a pit stop. I think a lot of times if I'm trying to go off of recognition thinking here, most of the time you're not really going to see them even in a safety car scenario pit, because then you're giving up possible position, but everybody pit. Now, is that just it was opportunistic to be able to go ahead and pit, or was it those tires were so bad that they had to pit? I kind of lean towards just opportunistic, because we didn't really see that many issues with the tires in the Grand Prix. We did see a lot of lockups, and that's part of it. And who knows, maybe there may have been more lockups in the sprint that weren't mentioned if you're watching the broadcast. I just think it's interesting that we saw literally everybody pretty much pit in that sprint race. And then they decided not to in the Grand Prix. I would have thought if you're going to do that, do it in the sprint. You got less laps to survive on. I don't know. It's just kind of interesting to think about. you know, then we go to the Grand Prix feature quali, and we have George, who seems to just randomly start having issues. I never figured out what those issues were, but he was having issues in Q3. It looked like he was going to lock in the pole. And then Kimi Antonelli was able to lock it down and get pole, become the youngest person in F1 history to secure a pole. And he did that in his second race of his second season. That's kind of crazy to think about. And then to add into that, going on to win the race, he becomes the first Italian in 20 years to win a race. And even crazier is the fact that 20 years ago, that Italian won on the second race of the season, and Kimi Antonelli just won on the second race of the season. So it's just interesting. And a lot of history is getting made there. And I think it's very interesting to think about the fact that a lot of people questioned if Kimi was going to be that guy for Mercedes. A lot of people said he was going to be the next Max. He came out and started very slow last season. So a lot of people questioned if that was really going to be the case. Obviously, he turned it up some in the second half of the season last season. But then, he's starting off super strong. He took second place at Australia. He had an insane sprint race, even though he got that 10-second penalty. I think that was, as the announcer put it, it was a rookie mistake, even though he's not a rookie. Well, it is only his second season, so give him some break there, give him some slack there. Second race of his second season at that. He's got some nerves probably going through him because he realizes they have a real shot at winning constructors this season. But, outside of that, he had a great race. Brought it back a lot. Obviously, that safety car kills him from keeping anything because it's going to bunch everybody back up. And you have a 10-second penalty. That's going to kill some stuff for you. And then we look again, going back to the feature quali. He takes pole. Ferrari's only 0.3 off that Mercedes. When we look at the sprint qualifying, I want to say it was 0.6 was the gap. When we looked at the qualifying at Australia, I want to say it was 0.8. I'd have to go back and double check. I didn't pull that number. I probably should have, but I didn't pull it. I want to say it was 0.8. That's a big difference. And now they're only 0.3 off of Mercedes. I don't know what they've necessarily adjusted to the car, but they are obviously doing something right. It's also possibly a combination of China is a better track for that car compared to Australia, because Australia is such a high speed track and China is a very corner heavy track. I honestly expected Ferrari to win today, being that they are faster in the corners. For Mercedes just made up the difference in the straights, though. It was insane to think about how fast they were in the straights. When you look at last year in China, we're talking Ferrari and Mercedes, obviously. You look at last year. Last year, Ferrari was 5th and 6th in the race and then got disqualified for too much plank wear. They were a mile away from 5th and 6th today, though. It was insane. I pulled the number. It was, I want to say, a 20-second gap between Charles and Behrman. Let's see, the finish time for Charles was a 1:33:44.501, and for Behrman it was a 1:34:12.875. So it was, quick math in my head here, 32-second gap, which Lando had a 35-second gap. So in Australia, so they're pretty consistent. The 5th place is half a minute behind them, which is a lot. And they're continuing this pace. It's kind of terrifying for the rest of the field that we're seeing such a dominant Ferrari, and they can't even keep up with Mercedes right now. So it's kind of crazy how dominant two cars are, and then there's still even a bigger gap in between them. Is it just luck of the track so far? I don't know. I mean, you look at last year, McLaren ran away in Australia, then they ran away in China, and then Max just came out of nowhere to win Japan. So we might see something like that happen again. We don't, and it's very possible that Ferrari wins, I think, at Japan, because Japan is such a corner heavy track. And we saw today in the race, George came over the radio and said they're just fast in all the right places. All the right places were the corners. And Japan really only has, that I can think of, 2 straights, maybe 3. Everything else is a very windy track. If you look at all of Sector 1 there, it's S's. You look at, you go from a double apex into S's, then you have the trek up the hill, a sharp 90 degree, another 90 degree, a hairpin, a long, not really straight, but not really corner either, and then another double apex. So, I mean, they might have a chance there to make up for that. We'll see. Again, that's getting ahead of ourselves and getting ahead of the episode a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes, because I just could have swore that China was going to be that track that Ferrari just broke away from Mercedes, because Ferrari is so good in the corners. And then they didn't, and it crushed my soul a little bit. I ain't gonna lie. It crushed my soul as a Ferrari fan. The next big question that we have, though, is Red Bull in danger? Like, Alpine outqualified both the Red Bulls in the sprint quali and the feature. Granted, it was only Pierre Gasly that did so, but an Alpine, of all cars, outqualified both Red Bulls. Then Max loses like 6 places for like a 3rd time in a row. He has not had a good start yet. Every time he goes to start, the car bogs. And as skilled as Max is, that really raises questions. We're talking about a guy that gets in a car and after a lap or 2 has the car figured out. And that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but Max is not somebody that takes a lot of time to learn the car. He's a natural driver. So if he's struggling this bad, like, what does that say about this car? It doesn't give me warm and fuzzies about this Red Bull. I mean, I thought that they were going to be fighting 4th place anyways. I didn't expect Hadjar to do this good. And Hadjar seems to be doing a little bit better with the car. At least he did in Australia. Today just didn't seem like it was anybody's car to drive out of the Red Bull team. Like I said, Max lost 6 places off the start. We saw Hadjar fighting Behrman absolutely just lose the rear end. We saw Max locking up and going off track. We saw him trying to, make corners and couldn't, and going off track because it just wasn't gripping. He was understeering. It's wondering, how did the Red Bull go so far backwards? It wasn't a great car last year. And you could argue this car is worse than last year's car, which is mind-blowing to me. Both Red Bulls got beat by an Alpine that a year ago was the worst car on track. That a year ago, their second driver did not score a single point, and he has a point this year. A year ago, they looked like they were parked while everybody else was driving, and they're over here beating Red Bull now. Make that make sense. You're talking about the best driver of this generation And I say this generation because I don't want to say on the grid because Lewis is still there, and I would argue that Lewis is still a better driver than Max. But of his generation, Max is by far the best. And he's getting beat by an Alpine. That says a lot about that car. And I know there's going to be some people that come after me for that comment. And there's going to be some people that love it. But let's face it, it is what it is. Max is the best of that generation to come up into F1. And he is struggling this badly with this car. That just doesn't make sense to me. Now, what I think is funny, looking at the Grand Prix, is the fact that Charles comes over the radio and goes, or let's back up for a second. Let's back up. Let's look at the sprint and let's look at the feature. The best racing of this weekend, hands down, came from Ferrari fighting Ferrari. Charles and Lewis were not backing out of anything. We saw that in the sprint, and we saw that in the feature, in the Grand Prix. And they were absolutely dogfighting the whole time. They said, we might not be able to fight Mercedes, but we going after each other. And I love it. And I love the fact that the way they went about doing it, while it was still hard racing, was safe racing. There were a couple times you were questioning, are they about to hit each other because of how hard they were racing? But they stayed out of each other. They stayed clean the whole time. And I love that. I love that we still get that excitement at the front, and it's not chaos and, oh gosh, who's going to wreck? And you kind of have that question, but nothing ever happens. As a Ferrari fan, I love to see it because it's fun to watch. And it's relaxing and comfortable to know that you're not going to have a wreck. And I think it comes down to you have two very experienced drivers and two very, very, very talented drivers. I saw a post asking, do we think that this duo is the best wheel-to-wheel drivers on the grid right now? And after the display they put on in China, I would argue yes. Because we saw other wheel-to-wheel action in China and in Australia, and a lot of it ended with either it wasn't as tight as that was, or it ended in accidents. So, you know, could they be? Absolutely. It'd be interesting to break down and look at. And I'm here for it. I love the racing. And for the drivers to be able to say that this was so much fun, you have Charles, who lost that battle, coming over the radio going, that was a fun battle. If you're loose enough to be able to say that, great things are going to happen. When you look at any other sport, the number one thing a coach tells you is be comfortable, be loose. That's when you'll perform best. And if you're having fun, you're comfortable and you're loose. So when they inevitably rein in the gap between them and Mercedes, and they're that comfortable and that loose and having fun, they're not going to make nearly the same mistakes that you can put somebody under pressure to make. And it's going to be so much fun to watch. And I'm here for it. And it might be delusion as a Ferrari fan, but I know it's coming. I just know it's coming. Now, the one thing that was not on my bingo card for China was the absolute defense masterclass that Franco Colapinto put on lap 20, being double teamed by Haas. Essentially, you had one on the left, one on the right, and he's keeping them behind him for multiple corners throughout lap 20 and lap 19. And last year, if you had told me that Franco Colapinto was going to pull that off, I would have laughed at you. Because last year, he was so bad that he couldn't score a single point. And then he just went out there and kept one of the best drivers in the midfield behind him. If you were to say who's the best driver in the midfield, I'd argue Ollie Behrman. Like, I simply would. Ollie Behrman is that guy in the midfield right now. And Franco Colapinto kept him and Ocon behind him, which was amazing. It was fun to watch also. Now, the other part of the midfield teams that we haven't got to yet, and it could just be because it's China. China's a lot more difficult than Australia. But was Australia a fluke for Lindblad? he had a great race there. I can't remember off the top of my head where he finished. I know he finished higher than Liam Lawson, and he finished in the points. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Uh, he finished. See, that's qualifying. Let's look at race classifications. Last week he finished 8th place at Australia. This week he finished 12th. And he had 2 spins, lock up and spins, just on his own. Nobody really did anything to him. But he locked up and spun. And that's kind of crazy to me. So was it a fluke that he made out as good as he did in Australia? Or is he just having a bad race? Because China is not the easiest track compared to Australia, at least in my opinion. You got a lot more stuff like hairpins and heavier braking zones. In China, you had a lot of variation in speed because of battery and whatnot, causing some lockups at China that we didn't really see in Australia. So, I mean, is it possible that it was just an off weekend? Yes. If he continues this, though, does that really make you question, was he ready to come up? Or, like, what's the deal? Again, it's really early to say. We're only 2 races in. He had a phenomenal race at Australia, so it could have just been an off week for him and not one of those tracks that he's strong at. You never really know. And like I said, time will tell. You can't hide it. F1 is not one of those sports where you can fake it till you make it. Either you can do it or you can't. So we'll have to see what Lindblad does. So now we're going to kind of get into looking at the insanity that is reliability in this regulation. I don't think it's necessarily a regulation's fault. I think it's a start to a new regulation, so people are figuring it out. And I want to be very clear about that. I'm not hating on this regulation. I think if you're hating on this regulation, you're just too stuck in your ways and you don't like the new reg. When the ground effect era started, everybody hated on it, especially Lewis fans, because Lewis struggled with it more than anybody else. But as the era went on, more and more people got more and more comfortable with it and liked the racing. And we're seeing a change now where you got new regulations and everybody are hating on it again, except for like Lewis fans, because now he's not dealing with ground effect error and he's racing phenomenally. And I question if it's just a matter of we're set in our ways or if there's genuinely issues. I personally have some issues with this regulation, but I don't think the regulation as a whole is as terrible as everybody's making it out to be. I would like them to go away from being so dependent on the battery that without the battery, there is no real racing involved. But I don't think the regulation as a whole is terrible. I think that there's a lot of pros that we will really see at tracks like Monaco, when you need a smaller car. I know the car itself isn't that much smaller, but when you have 2 side by side, I think it's enough to make a big difference. I think that the heavier braking tracks, the battery may not be as big of a deal, especially if they come in after China like they say they have or are going to, and determine that we're going to change how the battery is deployed and how it regens. I think it could balance out and make for better racing, but I think right now the car is too dependent. I think in the past, when we had, I believe it was 75-25, it didn't matter as much if your battery went out because you still had the engine doing most of the work, the combustion engine. Obviously, the battery helped, and obviously you had to manage your battery, but you weren't deploying your battery nearly as much as they're deploying it now. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed and needs to be fixed. I think a lot of fans are upset with it. I think a lot of the drivers are upset with it. And I don't know that they can just sweep this under the rug and say, oh, it'll get better as the regulation goes on. If we wanted to watch Formula E, we would watch Formula E. And it's kind of troublesome in my mind that we're getting so close to that. What makes F1 so much better than Formula E, in my opinion, is you have the big, loud engines. You have this ability to just dog the car if you need to. But when you become so reliant on battery, you can't do that. You can't push the car so hard because you have to keep the battery. And that just takes away from it some. But getting on to the main part that I wanted to look at is, with a new regulation comes some reliability issues. For a second week in a row, we have, let me pull the numbers back up again so I can be 100% on this. I know we had 6, let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We had 7 non-classifieds this week. Last week we had, that's qualifying. Sorry. Last week we had 1, 2, 3. We had 6 last week, 7 this week. That's a lot of non-classifieds. And we had 4 that didn't even start. Then we had 1 that only lasted 9 laps, 1 that lasted 32 laps, and 1 that lasted 45 laps out of 56 laps. So let's break this down for a minute, shall we? I didn't really figure out why Gabby Bortoleto. I'll Google that real quick and figure out why Gabby didn't start. But making sure I spell his name right. We know that McLaren didn't start either one of their cars. They supposedly, from what I researched, had electrical issues with the Mercedes engine, the Mercedes power unit, that prevented them from starting the race in China. And that is both cars. Now, I am not jumping on this bandwagon to say that Mercedes is sabotaging McLaren. They don't need to do that. They just don't. They have to give them the same engine, but they don't have to give them the exact details of this engine under the F1 rules. So why sabotage? They've had more time to figure out this engine. There's no need for it. But it makes you question the reliability of this engine. But at the same time, I don't know. We've seen most of the other cars run pretty strong in it. It's just what it is, I guess. But it hurts if you're a McLaren fan, simply due to the fact that they're slipping more and more away from being able to fight for the constructor title. If you're an Oscar Piastri fan, it's even worse because we're 2 races into the season and he has 0 points. And when we started this season, I said that McLaren would not be fighting for constructors and Lando would not be fighting for a driver's title. Now, that being said, I never imagined that it would be this bad for them. You know, Lando finished 35 seconds behind Charles and finished in 5th place at Australia. Then they didn't even start the race in Shanghai. And then in the sprint, let's see, where did they finish in the sprint? Lando finished 4th and Oscar finished 6th. And it was a tighter gap this time. But remember, they had that safety car that brought them all back together. At one point, the gap was a little bit bigger. I don't know. This McLaren looks really not good. And I hate to say that, but they just don't. if you look up the F1 standings right now, I said we'd get into this, but let's go ahead and look at it right now. I'm pulling it up right now to look at the teams. For the teams, we have Mercedes with 98 points in first. We have Ferrari 67 points behind and in second. So they're 31 points behind. That's just one good weekend and one bad weekend for Mercedes. That's not really out of it yet, and we're only 2 races in. Obviously, nobody's really out of it. Well, I say that. Some teams are pretty much out of it already, unless the cars just absolutely fell apart ahead of them. But Mercedes has 98 points, first place. Ferrari 67 points in second place. And then we jump all the way to McLaren in third with 18 points. Then we have Haas at 17 points. So earlier I said they were 2 points behind, and I was wrong. They are 1 point behind McLaren. Haas, the team that no one ever imagined this. I said 5th place, and they were going to be getting ran off. The gap between them and Red Bull is going to be insane, I thought, for the whole year. I thought that, I mean, obviously 2 races in, it's not going to be that big of a gap, but I never imagined they'd be in 4th. They are now ahead of Red Bull with 17 points, and Red Bull has 12 points. Yes, that's only a 5-point gap. But for them to be ahead at any point says 2 things. Haas has figured something out with his car, and Ollie Behrman is absolutely carrying these jokers on his back and doing all this work. And 2, Red Bull looks really bad. Like, really bad. This week, I don't think they scored any points in the Grand Prix. Max DNF'd. And okay, Isaac Hydrar finished in 8th place. So he got in the points, but just kind of barely. And that is not good for Red Bull. Then we see Racing Bulls, who are they're tied. You have Racing Bulls and Red Bulls tied. So the junior team is tied with the A team. Who would have thought that coming into the season? That is absolutely crazy. And then Alpine is only 2 points behind them with 10 points. Alpine is sitting in 7th place right now. I thought they'd be in 6th at the end of the season. Granted, we're only two races in. But we got Haas at 4th with 17 points. Red Bull in 5th with 12 points. Racing Bulls in 6th with 12 points. And Alpine in 7th with 10 points. The midfield is really close right now. And who is shaking it out is really surprising. Then we have Audi with 2 points, Williams with 2 points, Cadillac with nothing, and Aston Martin with nothing. I'm not surprised. I called 9, 10, and 11 where they are. Audi is where I expected them to be at. And relatively speaking, if they can get the car on the track, they're doing really good. Nico Hulkenberg finished 11th today, but he looked really good still. Gabby didn't start because of technical issues, but he's looked really good this season. For them to have their first season in F1, they're looking really strong. And as they work the bugs out, I think people should start keeping an eye on them. I don't think they're going to be breaking into the top 4, but I also said that about Haas, and here we are. Williams is... They just need to be happy with whatever points they can get right now, I feel like. Carlos Sainz got 9th place today, so that's 2 points. Be happy you got him. It took 6 people going out, I feel like, for him to get in the points. Because the car is 28 kilograms overweight. And they're saying it's going to be 6 races, and that was before China. So I don't know if they calculated China into this. If they did, that means they have 5 more races of this car being overweight. That's not 5 weekends. That's 5 races. Next weekend, we don't have a race. So keep that in mind. So 5 races. It's like a month or 2 that it's supposed to take them to get this car back into weight. That's bad. Like, if you're trying to fight for constructors' places, How do you do that in a car that is 28 kilograms overweight? Now, it was nice. We're talking about the back markers here now. It was nice to see Cadillac actually have a decent race, I would say. Finished 13th and 15th. I know a lot of people did not finish the race, but Bottas did beat Esteban Ocon. It wasn't two Cadillacs in the very back this time. They were both only one lap down compared to Australia, where they were okay, only one lap down, both of them that time too. I think we're 3 laps down. 3 laps down. So they're making improvements. The car didn't fall apart this week. They kept both mirrors on each car, and they kept whatever flew off of Perez last week. It stayed on the car too. So that's improvement, and they are still beating Aston Martin. So it could always be worse. Be losing to Aston Martin. I think it's crazy that we still have such an issue with vibration that Fernando Alonso pulled the car over because it was vibrating too badly for him to drive it. How is this still a problem? I mean, I get that you don't just figure things out overnight, but they've known they've had this issue since preseason testing. The first time, and I think in Barcelona. So it's been like over a month now, and they still haven't figured this out. At what point do you go, okay, this weekend we're literally taking it out there, we're going to run 2 laps, we're pulling it out, and the whole time we're focusing on fixing the car? At this point, it is not safe to drive, in my opinion, when you're talking about, I can't feel my hands, so I'm having to stop racing. And you're talking about having to control a car going 200 miles an hour while not being able to feel your hands. That's a big problem. That's not easily just overlooked. Can Fernando Alonso be a diva at times? Yes, Alonso can definitely be that. He can be a big baby at times too. But when both your drivers are saying this is an issue, you have to figure it out. Lance Stroll lost the car on lap 9 to a technical issue. Let me see if it'll tell me. Let me see if I can figure out what made the car stop. They never said in the broadcast. So it's suspected to have battery-related failure that caused him to lose power and shut down in turn 1 of the race on lap 9. There's no 100% this is what it was yet, but that is the initial suspect, is that it was the battery. But then you go into, if it's the battery, how much of this is because you're shaking the car so drastically that it's breaking stuff? You have to get this figured out, because they can't afford to just buy part after part after part if that's the case. They're in real danger here. And I think that needs to be fixed. And I think part of the problem, and we're going to get into this now, is Adrian Newey was not in China this weekend from the reports that I saw. And then when you read a little deeper, what I saw says that Adrian Newey is splitting time between being team principal and head of engineering. He's only going to 10 races. The other races, he'll be working in the factory on engineering the car. That's a problem. How can you be a team principal and not be at the races? Like, I know that every now and then a team principal misses a race because of family, because of life, because of whatever. You can't be there 100% of the time. People get sick, stuff happens. I get that. But to predetermine that you're not going to be at 10 races as the team principal is a problem. How can this go on? Now, I will say, it is more important for him to figure out what is going on with this car and how to fix it than to be there for a race that they're not going to finish anyways. I will give them that. But if they continue this trend, even after they get stuff figured out to where they can at least run a race, how do you expect them to optimally function when the team principal is not even there? That is terrible. And I don't see how you can do that. So, and I'm kind of going down the path where I feel like Nui needs to pick a side. Do you want to be an engineer or do you want to be team principal? You can't do both. That's becoming more and more apparent if you're having to have the issues where it doesn't look like certain managerial position or calls are not being made and stuff's being overlooked. Like the fact that you found out 3 months before the season started that the entire Honda team has never been in F1 engines. And you just figured this out 3 months before. You dropped the ball in management. And now we're finding out that you're not going to be at all the races. Like you're dropping the ball again in management. How can you do both? At this point, I'm starting to think that Nui needs to either be an engineer or be a team principal. And if I was given that ultimatum as Nui, I'm doing the thing that's made me all my money that I've been good at, and that's being an engineer. Unless he's planning on stepping down from being head engineer and just being team principal at some point in his future with Aston Martin, I don't see why he's doing both. It just doesn't make sense. And I think it's only going to hinder the team as they go on. I don't like the way it looks. I can't imagine it's great in the paddock, or not the paddock, but in the garage. Because where's your team principal at? Oh, he's back at the plant working on the car. Well, that's not great. Because we need him here to make calls. I think they got to figure something out. And then we have to see, once they figure out the issues with the car, does he continue doing that? If so, then he needs to pick a side. Which one do you want to do? Because obviously you're not optimally doing both. I think, though, overall, China was a fantastic race. China was a fun weekend to watch. It was great to watch Ferrari battle and keep the pace that they had going. I think they chose to fight a little too early. I feel like if they had waited, maybe we see 2 Ferraris on the podium if you work together to keep George behind you, and that's points that we needed as a constructor with Ferrari. As I've made it very clear, I am a huge Ferrari fan, so that would have been nice to see. But overall, it was good to see them being able to fight and just how much pace those cars had. It's great to see Lewis up there with Charles. Last year, Lewis just got ran off the track by Charles every race, every qualifying. And you could see it on his face that he just looked defeated and he looked tired and he looked worn down. And this season, he looks like he's having fun again. He's looking like the Lewis that was winning championships, like in his posture, in his face, in the way he talks. The Lewis that everybody loves is back, is what I would love to say. Now, do not take that as me saying I think he's going to win the championship. Don't take that as me saying that I think he's going to outperform Charles. I just think it's going to be closer. And I think because of that, if Mercedes does happen to slip and Ferrari is there because of these engine testing regulations that are going to be changing, with Lewis being that close to Charles, it becomes a slam dunk for Ferrari to take over the constructor title, I think. You need 2 drivers, and they're both right there together. They're so close, they're able to fight like they did in China. And it's very exciting to watch and very exciting to see Lewis happy again, the way he was when he was fighting for titles. And for that matter, it's fantastic to see Charles happy. He's so loose in that car and happy that he's able to sit there and talk about how much fun he's having racing over the radio instead of just yelling at the engineers about how bad the car sucks. So I think that is very, very indicative of how the season could go for Ferrari. and it's very exciting to see where this is going to go. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up for the night. I'm going to go ahead and say we got Japan next. I'll try to make my predictions. Um, I said earlier that I think Ferrari is going to have the advantage because they are a better car in the corners, and 99% of Japan is corners. So I think Ferrari edges out Mercedes. I think we possibly see a 1-2 out of Ferrari and then see George round off the podium. I know Max won Japan last year after the car had been terrible. I don't see Max being there. He can't even figure out the starts yet. I don't see Lando being there. He just doesn't have pace. I don't see Oscar being there because that McLaren does not have pace. I know Haas is squeaked up into the top 4. I know they're running a Ferrari power unit. I know Oliver Behrman is a fantastic driver. I don't see him being able to mix it up either. So I see the podium being rounded off as Charles, Lewis, and George, and possibly mix that up between Lewis and Charles. That's it. And if that's the case, I think that's going to be a huge momentum booster for Ferrari and something that is very needed, especially going into an extended break. Oh, one other thing that I forgot to cover. Bahrain and Saudi Arabia have been confirmed to be, if you look at the app, it says postponed. I think it's pretty much just going to be canceled. They've said that they're not going to replace their tracks with other tracks. And with the war that's going on over there, they said they don't want to go back until it's safe. So could it be possibly put on the tail end of the calendar? Maybe. I don't see it happening though, even though it does say postpone. So with that being said, you have 2 extra weeks of development that you don't have to worry about losing points in racing. So if they can win in Japan, that's huge momentum, get good data in Japan, and come back after it's like a month or 2 of being off. It's basically a mid-season break early in the season. It's going to be absolutely fantastic for Ferrari as long as Mercedes doesn't make huge strides as well. And then on top of that, take away those 2 races, that's less points that Mercedes can grab under that engine before they're told, hey, you can't use this engine anymore because of compression ratios. And then we come back to see just how well they re-innovate that engine. With that being said, though, I have enjoyed talking China with y'all tonight. And like I said earlier, subscribe to us on YouTube. All of our episodes go live on Mondays at noon. You can catch the episodes on Spotify at noon on Mondays as well. Every Sunday night, we will be live at 8:30 on Twitch, unless something comes up, in which case the Discord will be notified. So go follow or go join the Discord server so you can get any updates for the podcast that may be happening. Not to mention you get to hang out with the community, talk more F1 with more like-minded people. But if not, I hope you'll have a great week and hope you'll have a great night.